Damaged Defenders by Sherza. Chapter 107. Sam. They'd barely gotten a newly shrunk banner back on the jet before Sam started mentally switching from soldier mode to counselor mode. It was kind of hard not to. Not with literally half the team either looking very pale and or grim, having gone silent, sounding strange and or excessively snappish, or some other indicator of emotional stress. And definitely not when he knew for absolute certain that Barnes at least had a panic attack or a flashback. It was hard to tell which with him not talking much, but it really didn't matter which in the final analysis. It just mattered that he'd very clearly had a major problem. Sam still didn't know why Stark had gone weird or what exactly the problem was, but even through the speakers of his suit, Stark sounded off. Unfortunately, Stark stayed in the suit and flew escort, making talking to him almost impossible. They had the capability for private conversations on the comms, of course, but that sort of conversation wasn't one Sam was willing to take chances with someone overhearing. The team members themselves would never stoop to trying to break into a private conversation or using something they accidentally overheard against a fellow team member. Sam did not put such a thing past anyone else who might be monitoring their airwaves, however. The good news was that Rogers was looking a little less murderous around the edges. The bad news was that he only looked a little less murderous. He kept giving the Von Strucker triad looks that made every hair on Sam's body stand on end. Rogers had also planted himself between Barnes and the three, his body language fairly screaming, "Give me an excuse to beat you bloody." It probably wasn't helping Rogers' mood any that Barnes was still seriously pale and looked very much like he wanted to claw the Winter Soldier uniform off himself. In point of fact, Barnes kept tugging at some of the straps in a way that made Sam pretty sure Barnes wasn't even aware he was doing it. Note to self, make sure to mention getting a new uniform for Barnes before they went on the next Hydra raid. Sam wasn't dumb enough to think this would be the only one. Sam hadn't been a fan of the idea of Barnes going on this raid in the soldier getup in the first place. He understood that Barnes had, for one, not had any other readily available options, and two, had wanted to send a really clear message to Hydra. That said, Sam had been aware of the potential for trouble that came with wearing that suit. Romanov was harder to read than most of the others, but even she was looking a little pinched around the eyes and sounding, well, flatter would be the best word for it, than Sam had yet heard her be. If Sam had her pegged right, that put her on about the same level of distress as Stark. It wasn't all that surprising, given she had apparently been in Hydra hands at some point to have known the soldier. Even if she hadn't known his true identity at the time, dealing with the bastards who had likely had a role in her situation was bound to be uncomfortable at best. Logan was looking rather grumpier, growlier, and twitchier than Sam liked. Again, not all that unexpected, given that Logan had clearly been in inimical hands sometime pre-amnesia. Because, seriously, Sam didn't know all that much about mutants and mutations, but he seriously doubted that the metal in Logan's bones was a natural part of his mutation. Also, and if Sam was thinking this, Logan had to be. What if it had ultimately been Hydra that was responsible for Logan's situation? Given Hydra was evidently responsible for Romanov and her fellow widows, as well as Soldier, it was not beyond the realm of possibility. Logan did, however, seem to be aware he was not in the best of moods to be dealing with people. He'd taken himself off to a corner of the jet and was doing his hardest to ignore everyone except for Allardyce, who was also looking a little pale and twitchy, but not nearly as bad as the others. Given Allardyce's mutation, Sam figured it was a safe bet that flaming anywhere near people was what had set the kid off. Just the idea of possibly burning or worse, cooking people alive should be enough to make anyone with any morals whatever twitchy at the very least. Given that, from what Sam understood, mutations were almost never under perfect control when they first manifested, the odds that Allardyce had burned someone inadvertently, at the very least, early on were insanely high. And having had that happen would make anyone with any morals whatever even touchier. And Allardyce definitely had morals. He was mad at the world, and the potential for him going off the deep end was there, but he hadn't. Better still, the likelihood of him going off the deep end had dropped considerably since he came to the tower. Sam had no idea what the deal had been at Xavier's, but it was clear that John was a heck of a lot happier in the tower. Sam was just grateful that Fury seemed to pick up on the fact that the Avengers were kind of on a hair trigger and didn't give anyone crap. Though it was clear he desperately wanted to, if the look on his face was any indication. Well, the look on his face after he got over the heart attack that was the Winter Soldier. That had been kind of amusing, even to Sam, who didn't really have any beef with Fury, which some of the other Avengers clearly did. When they finally got back to the tower, Sam hung back just a bit, watching. He had clearly not been the only one worried about the Avengers, because the support squad was out in force. Potts had Stark herded off of the common floors about 3 seconds after he was out of the suit. Coulson and Barton tag-teamed Romanov, who was clearly humoring them, just as fast and disappeared down the stairs rather than wave at the elevator. "Supper will be here in 20 minutes, was Lewis's bellowed contribution, clearly trying to make sure she was heard by the gang as they split up. Though that done, she quickly joined Foster and Thor to tag team Loki. Sam wasn't sure Loki was upset. He'd very clearly had a lot of fun on the raid, but Loki was also, well, Loki. Sam wasn't about to trust that he would be able to tell when someone who had been hailed as Silvertongue was upset, but hiding it until he'd gotten to know Loki a whole heck of a lot better. Ross hustled over to half drag Banner off to their floor. Banner didn't seem to be in any kind of emotional distress, thankfully. That said, the transformation clearly did a number on him physically. If Sam didn't know better, he'd think Banner was drunk between Banner slurring his words and the difficulty he was having keeping his feet under him. Logan retreated to his own floor with Allardyce and Rogue, hot on his heels. Sam made a mental note to check in on them later. Frankly, right now, those two were a lot less of a concern than Rogers and Barnes. Logan clearly had at least a partial handle on how to deal when crap hit the fan. Rogers and Barnes, on the other hand, didn't have a clue. Worse, both were, well, in really bad places and inclined to try to support each other and ignore their own problems. Worst of all, they didn't really have a pre-existing support squad that they knew and trusted to help them. Yeah, Sam was going to start there. "I'm thinking," Sam said as he followed the pair, "that once we get that crap off of you, Barnes, we head for the roof and burn it. What do you think?" Barnes half scowled at him, the expression more confusion than anger, then turned to Rogers, clearly deferring to him and his decision. "That," Rogers said on a growl, "sounds like the best idea I've heard all day." Unfortunately, that seemed to have been the end of Barnes' ability to deal. By the time the three of them had gotten to Rogers' floor, Barnes had shut down. His expression had gone completely blank, and he was no longer acting on his own reconnaissance, nor reacting to anything that happened around him. Which of course upset Rogers more than he already had been. Sam ended up grateful that he had come along because Rogers didn't seem to be able to order Barnes around. He'd start to, then get a kicked puppy look on his face and peter off into silence before his expression went super pissed. Not at Barnes, Sam knew, but at the damage that had been done to him. Unfortunately, orders were the only thing Barnes was responding to now that he'd shut down. Fortunately, Sam didn't have any compunctions about giving Barnes orders. There'd come a time when they'd have to wean him off of needing them, of course, but that time wouldn't be for quite a while yet. Sam was careful to keep the two men in line of sight of each other while he gave Barnes the necessary orders. The team had pretty much had to pry the two of them away from each other by main force since Barnes had been brought into the tower. Even shut down the way he currently was, Barnes sort of gravitated towards Rogers. Sam didn't want to make the situation worse by separating them. It was the kind of crap that both broke Sam's heart and gave him hope that Barnes would eventually recover fully. And also worried the ever-loving heck out of Sam because, God forbid, something happened to Rogers before Barnes climbed all the way out of the hole he'd been thrown into. Sam had a bad feeling they'd lose Barnes. Maybe not to suicide, but Sam had a bad feeling Barnes would simply shut down and refuse to come back out of it. They'd already seen what Rogers would do if he lost to Barnes. Not technically a suicide, but it had been the next best thing. And that had been before Rogers lost literally everything and everyone he'd ever known. Sam had zero doubts that Roger would find a similar situation if he lost Barnes again. Lewis, bless her, arranged for everyone's food to be sent to their floors once it was ready. Very wise move, given that pretty much no one was in the mood to be social. Of course, the meal just added fuel to Roger's fire because Barnes needed to be ordered to eat. Yeah, Hydra was in so much trouble. Seriously, Sam gave it 3 days max before Rogers insisted on kicking more Hydra butt. At least Rogers was managing to vent his anger on a completely acceptable target rather than innocent bystanders. After dinner, Sam sat Rogers down, with Barnes on the other side of the room, and did his best to get the man talking. Not that it worked terribly well. Rogers was nothing if not stubborn. It probably didn't help that back in his day, the mental health fields had rather iffy reputations at best, with therapies that ran the gamut from wacky to outright torture, and the cultural beliefs regarding emotional expression and mental health at the time. It was hardly surprising. Sam gave Rogers credit for not mocking the crap out of the modern mental health fields, but Rogers was still clearly dubious about making use of the non-medicine level of the mental health fields. Rogers got a pass on ignoring the medicine end, given that thanks to the serum, dosing Rogers with any medication was tricky at best and impossible at worst. Unfortunately, Sam did have an answer for Rogers' dubiousness about official treatment. Because it was one thing to go to a therapist, and another entirely to talk to a buddy. That said buddy just so happened to be a counselor, and could give good advice on how to deal with the crap that was raining down on Rogers' head was beside the point. By which Sam meant that he was very deliberately not reminding Rogers about his counselor cred. He figured Rogers would be far more comfortable talking to a fellow soldier, and was deliberately presenting himself as such as much as he could. Thankfully, Sam truly was both a fellow soldier and a qualified counselor, so it wasn't like he was lying to Rogers. Sadly, they were still basically strangers, so Rogers wasn't really up for trusting Sam with all that much. Good thing Sam had a lot of patience. Though he was going to have to start remembering to think of folks by their first names. Sam had gotten into the habit of using people's last names when he was thinking of them in a counseling capacity to make the difference between buddy and counselor more clear in his own head. This gig with the Avengers was hardly the first time he'd counseled people he fought alongside, after all. For whatever reason, possibly because of just how screwed up the Avengers were, Sam had been thinking of them solely by their last names, so he needed to change that.